time and energy to actually come out with what we think are some pretty good changes to the contracts. There were several contracts that were changed to several different sets of forms. The three main ones that we deal with are the buyer broker agreement, the listing agreement, and the contract itself. So those are the three changes that we'll address today as the most important ones. But obviously the tenant agreement changed, the rental listing agreement changed, clauses and addendums. I mean clauses and gosh, why am I losing?
Yeah. Well, just so everyone knows, there is a regular standing forms revisions link on NVAR.com. You just come to NVAR.com, click in forms. You'll get this search results coming up in just a moment. And from that one, just scroll down to the forms revisions. And anytime you can go in there and take a look at what those are. This one is standard forms changes July 1. You can see what happened earlier, what happened last January. So these are all always on the site. So this is not some special announcement they send out. This is what they do every July 1 and every January 1. It's specific today because we've got the selling listing agreement, the buyer broker agreement, and the contract. And what Sheila and I are going to hope to be able to show you is like on those three forms, how they are hand in glove now a little bit more. And we'll be pointing those out. But I did put the link to this website in the chat. If you guys want to go to chat and click this link, you'll be able to have this and highlight it so you can go back to it further.
Okay. And if you're a paper person, you can print this out so that when you're looking through the forms, that you'll see exactly what paragraph they're talking about where the changes are. It's important when documents change for you to understand and know what the changes were. So they'll give you the exact paragraphs. And as you can see, based on the list that they have here, there's just some substantial changes listed. So it's not just one or two words. Sometimes we get updates and it's got like some wording change, and that's the only thing that changed on the document. But these are substantial.
Right.
So we're going to start with the exclusive right to sell listing agreement and what's changed on that document.
Okay. So I'm just going to scroll through, and then when we get to the changes, we're probably just going to stop and go to the next document because we know we want to respect your time. And this call is usually an hour. We usually wrap it up in 45 minutes, but we'll try to keep it within an hour as much as possible. But further discussions will come toward us. So the first change is in paragraph 4, and I just want to point out, and Sheila and I will be going back and forth on this, guys. So this is just not just me, not just her. But the first thing is, what is agreement term, and then a listing term. And so as far as when you're putting in the MLS, these two terms are not interchangeable. The agreement term is when you guys have signed an agreement with the seller. That's the agreement term. That might be today. The listing term is when it goes into the MLS. Okay. And so that's the just one change there as far as a little bit of clarity on when I listed it, and then when it went active, and when it's going to active in MLS. Listing price.
Wait, Anthony, scoot back for a second. So in the listing term, okay, one of the major differences from before is because it still said when it was going to go into the MLS on or before. This one says listings shall be entered into the MLS within 2 days of the start of the listing term, or as MLS rules require. Now, there's going to be a form that has to be signed by your client at the time that you're doing a listing for the MLS. That's going to be saying like when it's actually going in. So within 2 days of this getting signed, it has to go in the MLS one of two ways. Or actually there's three, but it either goes in active coming soon, or it's going in as a exclusive office listing. Okay, so you no longer have a choice within 48 hours. It has to be uploaded to Bright, either as active or coming soon, or an office exclusive. There is no get around for this.
The other piece on that understanding is that the office exclusives will be searchable by Sheila, myself, and Steve Gaskins. So we can have a list of what's going on in our 2 offices as far as the office exclusives. We're going to talk further about how we're going to use that within our office. So we won't need to have the, bulk email to everyone. Hey, I have an off market or a pre-market listing come on. Call me if you want more information. We'll have that in one spot. It is searchable only by the brokers. Okay, so all agents out there will not be able to search it. You will not be able to search this in our own office. Only the brokers will be able to do that. And we'll talk more about that later as this is being released in July. All right,
okay.
listing price.
Yeah, because Anthony and I will end up sending it out.
Yeah.
To the offices so that you can see, and it might be an automatic morning thing that we do.
Yeah. All right, so here's the meat.
Anthony, can you make me co-host?
Yeah, sure thing.
Thank you.
Is that under, sorry.
Just go to participants, then where it says my name, and go to the end and then invite to co-host.
Got it, okay.
There's a little Zoom lesson for those of you who need it.
There it is, okay.
Awesome, thank you.
Hold on, not you there. Okay.
Cool.
You there?
Yep, here.
Got it, take it.
Got it. Awesome, so, actually, that's fine. So the listing broker compensation. So this is a big one. This is where they broke it down substantially. So what they had before, like that email that Anthony sent out, right? How they had it divided apart, where it was the total compensation of the total compensation. What did the buyer broker get? That's gone. There is no more of that. Now it's listing broker compensation. So 3%, 2.5, whatever your agreement is, of the commission to you. And then the expiration, where they had it in a different part, they actually brought it in here, the broker compensation within 30 days after the expiration, 45, whatever you put in there, 90 at your determination. So now it's just co-broke. So this is going to be where you would have put 5 or 6 before. You're probably putting 2.5 or 3 here. Everybody clear on that? Okay. B, additional listing broker compensation for an unrepresented buyer. Now we all know unrepresented buyers come along. We all know when you do it as a listing agent, when you have to handle that situation, you're doing more work in order to help that unrepresented buyer. Am I right or am I right? Here, they're going to give you the opportunity to tell the seller that you would like additional compensation if that happens. Does that make sense? You can do it as a percentage, a flat fee.
Or both.
Now, or both, right? Anthony and I were having a discussion about this yesterday. And what did we say, Anthony?
We said a lot of things. What this is doing is B and C. B is new, C is not. And I used to handle this in my own listings under C. And so I'm not even going to try to explain what we came up with on this one, Sheila. So get your last gulp of coffee in there. And yeah, because the additional, this is like, okay, because this is like you have someone from an open house comes in. I don't have an agent. Okay, great. You've already agreed with the seller I'm doing 3 for you, and now I'm going to do 1.5 if this guy comes along.
Right.
Variable rate, though, is disclosable on the MLS. In other words, you just got to click the box when you have it listing. Is this variable rate? Yes, it is. If you're getting, but that, and that's where I got mixed up because it was variable rate because I'm charging.
I'll explain it. Don't even go into what you mixed up. There you go. What I was hoping you were going to say there was that if you don't want to work with an unrepresented buyer, which was Lily's question right now in the chat. If you say, I don't want to work with an unrepresented buyer, you could still put a commission amount there. And if you get an unrepresented buyer, you could say, I could say it's my listing, unrepresented buyer comes in. I have in there that it's, I don't know, 2% for me to work with unrepresented buyer, 1.5, whatever. I can say, hey, Steve McElvain, will you work with the unrepresented buyer and just guide them through writing the contract for 1.5% commission? Does that make sense? Okay. So it still gives you the ability to not work with the unrepresented buyer, but have somebody in the office guide them through, because this is broker commission. So the commission is not coming to you as the agent. The commission is coming to the brokerage. So variable rate commission, a lot of you are probably saying, why do we have that in there if we have additional listing broker compensation for an unrepresented buyer? Did anybody think that when they first saw that?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Okay, so let me explain. There are more than just one way for variable rate to be explained. So we're an office that does not allow dual agency, right? Unless it's really extenuating circumstances and you really got to prove to us that like they're really extenuating. If there is an agent out there in the world in Northern Virginia that does dual agency, and we all know there are plenty of them, they could say to the seller, hey seller, if I take a 6% listing, but I end up bringing the buyer and I represent both you and the buyer, I could do this for 5%. That causes it to be a variable rate commission. Got that? Does that make sense? So that's where variable rate commission will come into play. Chances are for us, we're not going to have that. For us, B and C are pretty much the same. So you'll put NA or none in that area.
So
remember,
basically,
if you do have a variable rate commission, you have to disclose that it's variable rate. So if you do put something there, you have to check the box in the MLS that says variable rate. Veronica?
Yeah, so for example, so in this case, the variable rate is allowed for us or no? And if so, what would you think we should have put in this case?
No, because you shouldn't be doing dual agency. It's there because there are agents.
Okay, sounds good.
Do dual agency, so that's why it's there. But no, nobody should be putting anything there is what I'm trying to say.
Very good, perfect, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Because now we have B. B cleans it up.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. 100%. Okay.
If you got questions, folks, if you put them in chat, we'll address them in the chat. Okay, if you got questions on this so far.
Shane, you monitor the chat, please. I'm not looking at it as much as you are. All right. So I just want to make sure because there was something. Okay, perfect. All right. So the listing broker service fee. So there are several of the agents in the office that actually charge a fee outside of their commission to their clients for X. If you're a newer agent in our office from October of last year forward, there is a $2.99 fee that the office does have you charge. So this would apply to you. I want you to read, and if you can make it just a little bit bigger, Anthony, so they can see it, just zoom in just a hair. Perfect. So if you look what it says the seller will pay the broker an additional flat fee of X as the listing broker service fee during the term of the agreement if anyone produces a buyer ready, willing, and able, if during the agreement, anybody produces a ready, willing, and able buyer to the property. It doesn't say anything about getting to the closing table, right? So if the deal never happens, yet there was somebody that was ready, willing, and able. What does ready, willing, and able mean?
Ready to put an offer.
Thank
Ready to
you.
put an offer.
And
Pre-approved.
yes,
Willing is they will agree to the sales price that you are asking, right? So if they come in, it's a $500,000 house and they come in at 480, they're not willing. And able to buy the property, able gives you approval. So as long as they come in at ask, so if somebody says, oh, I want to try for more, we're going to list it at 500,000, but I want to try for 550. If they came in and they gave you 500, they were pre-approved and they gave you an offer, they owe you that fee. Understand? All right. Any questions about that one? You guys are great. No questions.
okay.
I'm sorry, Sheila, just to be sure I understand, apologize. And doesn't matter if that buyer is represented with another agent or has to be unrepresented. I'm sorry, I don't know if it.
It doesn't matter.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
So nothing changed, basically.
Yeah, it really, the only thing that it has to do with the buyer is saying that the buyer had a pre-approval, the buyer agreed to the sales price, and the buyer wrote an offer that they gave to you.
They're
So
ready.
if they did those three things, then you have earned that fee.
Perfect. Even though if we don't go to closing table.
Exactly.
And last question. Okay. And doesn't matter how many offer, how many buyer willing, we have, it's not based on how many offer or how many buyer ready, willing, we're going to receive it. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't say that it would be for multiple.
Okay.
Like it doesn't say if you brought 3 people that had that, you would get the fee 3 times.
Right.
It just says if you brought it, if they were those things, you'd get it at least once. Yeah.
Okay.
How much is
Guys,
that?
this has been in here for years, and it's
Right.
I've done all this work. You decided not to do anything. You've rejected every offer, even though they were ready, willing, and able. Okay, you owe me $299 is what our office fee is.
And
Wait, Paul, what were you going to say?
And this fee, Sheila, has to be all the same for each seller, or we can decide based on, if the house is a bigger house, or, it depends also on the type of seller and the type of the house.
Your fee is the fee for, if you charge one, you charge all.
Okay, it's to be the same for everybody?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you decide my fee is going to be $495. I'm going to charge everybody $495. I think you're going to start seeing some more fees come into play a little bit on the listing and the buyer side, because that's a way for people to recruit income. Raekwon, what were you going to ask?
Oh, no, it was answered. I was going to ask what the fee was.
Okay.
Got you. Okay.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. Or at least an add-on. We got two more paragraphs dealing with compensation. Okay. And everyone to really listen up. Got questions, put them in chat and we'll address them that way.
All right. So you got the seller paid buyer broker commission. So this is where a seller could offer a buyer broker commission. Now, I'm going to suggest to you guys as real estate agents to explain to your seller the value of a buyer's agent, right? And how important it is that this person on the other side of the transaction has representation. Because without representation, a lot of things are going to get blamed on the sell side if it doesn't go well. So really, really make sure that you talk about the importance there. So you have the buyer broker commission as a percent of the gross price or a flat fee. I want you to note what it says underneath. It says buyer broker commission is payable upon settlement. Seller understands that the buyer broker compensation is negotiable and it will ultimately be determined by a ratified sales contract between the seller and the buyer. Okay, what does that mean? That means that you're going to put something here if they want to offer compensation. Let's just throw a number out there, 2.5%. When the buyer's agent calls you, texts you, whatever, and says, what's the compensation? When it goes out on the KW website, as long as the DOJ doesn't screw that up, as long as it goes out on the KW website, you're going to put in 2.5%, right? That's what we're offering, yet it's all going to be negotiable in the actual offer. So even though this says that they're going to offer it, it could change higher or lower based on the offer itself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Let me just add one more. So what we've always said is it's always negotiable. What this settlement has done is like, okay, not only is it negotiable with the seller here, it will now be negotiable in the contract. And we'll get to that in just a moment. So what we're offering is not necessarily
Hi,
what
Amber. This is Leah Brogy.
Hold on, Shane. Thank you.
So what we're looking at here is it's negotiable here when I'm taking the listing with the seller, and then it becomes negotiable when I'm in the contract. Okay. What is disappearing is the language. It's off the top of my head, but it's not a uniform flat fee being paid to everyone. And so which is what we've always been working with, is I offer 2.5, everyone's going to get 2.5, depending on who goes to settlement. We won't know till ratification. That's the bottom line. We won't know till the date of ratification what the fee is on paragraph 7. He's willing, he or she, the seller, is willing to pay this, but it is still negotiable in the contract when we get there. I see a raised hand.
Shane.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Trish has a question. She said, NVAR is saying that the listing compensation is due regardless of who default, regardless if somebody defaults or not.
Yes. And I'll explain that when we get to the contract.
Right.
Okay. Hang tight, Trish.
Okay.
Okay. Seller subsidy.
Yeah.
Seller subsidy is what is the seller going to offer to a buyer, if anything. Why would they put this here? Well, a couple of reasons. You remember, in the current market that we're in, it's still a seller's market, and so you might not see subsidies technically. One, markets change, and so these documents going forward need to account for a market change. 2, a seller subsidy will be able to be listed in the MLS. Did you hear what I said? Right? So the commission cannot be, but the seller subsidy can be. And the seller subsidy says, seller subsidy is a payment from the seller towards the buyer's charges and closing costs, including but not limited to loan origination fees, discount points, buy down, subsidy fees, prepaids, or other charges, okay, which could be compensation, sorry, as allowed by the lender. If the seller subsidy reduces the total proceeds to the seller, a seller subsidy reduces the total proceeds to the seller at settlement. There are 2 ways that they can do it. They can check the box for it. They're not offering anything, or they can check the box, which is, no, I want you to be really aware of the wording. Seller will consider, which doesn't mean seller will do it. It means seller will decide whether or not seller will actually give the subsidy in the amount of whatever, because it becomes negotiable where? Where does it become negotiable?
In the contract, sales contract.
The
In the
contract.
contract. In the contract. It'll become negotiable in the contract.
So
So,
folks, in real quick, in your speed to get the listing in, you can't get sloppy here and say
Right.
seller's offering 2%. No, that's not what the contract says that we signed with the seller. The seller says seller will consider subsidy of up to 2%. Okay, that's how that needs the will consider. Possibly, these are words you're going to have to put in your remarks to make sure you're not saying seller offering 2% when it doesn't say he's offering 2%. Unless that's crossed out here in your listing agreement, and the seller says, I'm putting in 2% come hell or high water. It says, you repeat what says here. Seller will consider subsidy of up to 2%.
if the MLS doesn't address it with changing
Right.
how they worded that. And again, we're telling you that because we don't know what the actual change in the MLS is going to look like.
Mhm.
This
Yeah.
this verbiage doesn't make full sense to me. Are we saying that this is specifically in reference to how it's going to be entered into the MLS, or are we saying, because if we say will not consider and then a contract comes in with seller subsidy requested, what does that mean?
So again, anything is negotiable in the contract, but there's going to be a checkbox, I'm assuming, on the MLS that says either seller will or will not consider a subsidy. And if it will, it'll be this amount, right? Now, that's an assumption. I'm assuming they're going to mimic what the contract says. I would hope that they would.
Can I ask a
Anything's
question?
negotiable in the contract.
Can I ask about the unspecified amount?
What's that again?
And that's about what?
Raquan?
So the unspecified amount, if we're gonna have to put that in the MLS, an unspecified amount, like that's kind of vague.
Exactly.
Then what
is.
I would
So
say
it's saying
there
we
is,
consider something and we'll figure it out when we get to the offer.
Okay.
but
Or
what you
this
would-
is saying we're gonna do only a 1%, or we're gonna do only a $2,000 or.
so the way you would look at this, I don't know what
Or it could be
like you said, we
nothing.
don't know what the remarks
It could be
say.
nothing.
We don't know if the remarks are gonna be exactly based on this, and they're gonna have the same check boxes in the MLS. We just don't know that yet. But what I would submit is seller will consider seller subsidy. Boom, stop. That's the unspecified amount. Seller will consider seller subsidy up to 2%. Boom, stop. That's all you say. Seller will consider subsidy up to $5,000. Boom, stop. Whatever he said here, use the same language. Or seller will not consider seller subsidy. Now, that doesn't mean you don't write the offer with a seller subsidy. So what?
Right.
That's what he said. I'm going to write the offer wanting it. If I'm the buyer.
Agreed.
Okay.
Miguel?
Yeah, sorry. I'll be honest, I'm just talking out loud since we're all going
Sure.
over this for the first time. Wouldn't
Yeah.
it make the most sense just like to, recommend doing unspecified so that way there is flexibility for the seller? Like, because that makes the most sense to me just reading this, because, if they're getting multiple offers and they haven't specified anything, they're way more flexible, right? Wouldn't you
Right.
guys recommend that, or what are you thinking?
What's right here? Ultimately determined by a ratified sales contract. That's what all this here in 7 and 8 is ultimately determined by a ratified sales contract. Because once we get into the negotiation and making the offer to the owner, regardless of what he wrote here, he or she wrote here, we're now negotiating with a company that's not connected to this agreement. And the seller can, okay, sure, I'll give you $10,000 seller subsidy. Okay. And we'll get to, when you see the contract, it'll start making it a little bit more clear when we get to the contract.
Scott actually put a link in there of what the fields are gonna look like. And it does explain according to what the contract is, what we would need to put in the MLS. So
Right.
thank you, Scott. Appreciate that.
Which, look at that, guys, that link from Scott is to Bright. The stuff I'm showing you here is from NVAR.
Right.
So you got to keep up with both of them. They are two separate entities.
Yeah.
Scott, really appreciate you putting that in there. Here's what I would not have you go off and look at. Facebook groups. Okay. And I'll name them Echo Title. There's a lot of stuff on Echo Title's channel that's just like, some of it's been wrong.
A
So
lot
I'm
of
going
it's
to
been
call
wrong.
them out. All right.
Mhm.
But don't be getting your information from Facebook groups and YouTube videos, and particularly people that are not in our market who are doing YouTube channel videos.
And I'm going to go back to, again,
Yeah.
please do not discuss commission in any social media forum. The DOJ has people in those forums. They are absolutely finding out who of those of you who are discussing things that is an antitrust violation. Do not do it. I think if I had to go through what was the thought process and why this seller subsidy piece was important for them to put in the contract, I would have to surmise that it is because it is a field that will be in the MLS, and because a seller subsidy could be used by a buyer to pay the compensation the buyer says they're going to pay as according to the buyer broker agreement. So it is a roundabout way to possibly advertise what your compensation for a buyer broker would be. That's why I actually think they put it.
Right. You know, what I like about this is that now I'm not giving the seller's not paying a buyer broker compensation of 2.5, and then we've negotiated over here for, you know, $5,000, and then we get to the Alta and suddenly the buyer's getting 5,000 plus half the commission. This is really clear now.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm offering. Plus, remember, the buyer broker compensation that we're offering is going to be, and we'll get to this in the buyer agreement, it is also monitored by what's in the buyer agreement.
Mm-hmm.
If someone says 1% in the buyer agreement, guess what? They can't claim what we have here. Then we're going to get that in a second. So here's the broker to the whole crew that's on here right now. Start doing it now before we have to institute these changes in August. Quit putting what's offered in MLS.
You shouldn't be putting that either.
Yeah, here's what you put me in a spot. You send me documents that are already signed by the buyer and you put that in there. From here on out, here's what's going to happen. Put a true amount in there and have your buyer go back and sign it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going to start happening, okay? I've given everyone fair warning here. And we've been saying this for a month. Quit putting what's offered in MLS.
Yep. Great
Okay?
point.
And we're professionals here, and the change is being rushed through here to us. What's offered in MLS doesn't work. A waffling number is not going to work. Okay? So if you
Great
want
point.
3%, put 3%, because then you can come to the table and find out
We're
you
going to
can't
talk
get
about
it.
that when
Can
we
you
get to the
repeat
buyer
that
broker
again?
agreement.
No, I don't
We-
need to. We're recording it, but it'll be said again and again, okay? So
Okay.
put what you want from the buyer broker, okay?
Yeah, when we get to the buyer broker agreement, we're going to talk about that. Raekwon, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, sorry. So I was reading, seller understands that the buyer's broker compensation is negotiable and will ultimately be determined. But so from my understanding previously, right, after going, well, commissions were not negotiable, right? Like if I were a buyer's agent, I couldn't put in my contract that the seller pays a certain amount.
Right. When you see the contract
buy
in a
side.
second, that's being completely changed. You'll see that in a second.
Time.
Okay, so
And
now,
let me respond to that.
okay.
Commissions have always been negotiable. have always, since the beginning of time. If it was being offered in the MLS for it to be 2.5%, there was nothing that stopped a buyer's agent from picking up the phone and having a conversation with the listing agent about what the commission was and if they could negotiate more commission for themselves. So be really careful when you say that commission was not negotiable. It's always been negotiable, always. Yep.
We
And I
just
say
not
that because
listed in the,
the
yeah.
antitrust settlement is all under them saying that it wasn't negotiable, and it
Right.
always has been. Yeah. All right, sorry.
What you're about to see is the big change in the contract in a moment, that now it's in the contract. That's the big change. Okay,
yeah.
and, you know, and everyone will see that and ooh and ah in just a few moments. So
Yeah. All
so
right,
that's it
so
on the
any other
listing.
questions on the listing agreement?
Listing side. Okay.
Okay, good. Buyer broker agreement.
Paragraph 8.
Paragraph 8 is the compensation. Okay, what does it say right at the top?
Fully negotiable, is not fixed, controlled, recommended, or suggested by law or any multiple listing service or association of realtors.
Now, that was always the case. Just we needed to clearly state it right at the beginning. Okay. Anthony, you have something on buyer's duty highlighted.
On my paperwork?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we don't address it right now.
Don't address it now?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay. So here's where you would write in your compensation, whatever it is that you choose. Remember what the NAR settlement says. You can never receive more than what is in your buyer broker agreement. So if you choose to put 0% there, because you're hoping that the seller is going to offer something, what are you going to get? 0. You're going to get 0. You're not going to get anything. If you choose to write 3% and the agent on the other and the seller is offering 2.5%, what happens?
You get from the buyer the other 0.5%.
I couldn't understand you.
You get from the buyer the other 0.5%.
You could get from the buyer the other 0.5%. That's one way. What else can you do?
Could you could you talk to your buyer again and just like update that to reflect whatever is being offered?
You can, 100%. Anthony and I will sign those all day long.
You can call the listing agent and ask, to give you as a buyer agent, you can give a credit back to the seller, as we was doing before. You can always do an addendum, right? And give a credit back to the buyer as a buyer agent. Is an option, right?
So that would be only if you were actually getting the commission, right? So you can't give something that you don't get.
But you can give, yes, but you can give at the closing table, right?
So if that's the case, we're gonna amend the contract. That's the way we're gonna do it. We're gonna amend the contract.
Okay.
And we're gonna put it to whatever the seller says.
Can you repeat the question again, please? All right.
She asked if we could give the buyer a credit at the closing table. It's easier and cleaner to amend the contract than it is to give a broker credit letter at the closing table, because then the full amount needs to be put on the ALTA and then the credit has to happen. So they do then have to take that 0.5% from the buyer in order to give the buyer the credit for it, right? Like it's just going to be super clean to just change the agreement.
You mean the buyer agreement?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So do an addendum later, right? Do an addendum later after.
After.
Okay, makes
You're not
sense.
gonna know until after, because you're not
Right,
gonna know
right,
until you ratify.
right.
And again, get past your inspections, get past your everything, right? So that if it doesn't fall out, we amend this and then they go for another house and that's a different commission amount. So get it passed to where you think it's gonna go to the closing table and then let us amend it.
Right.
Sheila, can we also get that 0.5% from a potential concession that the seller will offer? Because you said we're going to get what we wrote down on this agreement. So where do we get that 0.5% from?
So that's a great question. Yes, that is a very good question, Sarah. So if you put in here 3% and the seller is offering 2.5%, and they're offering a subsidy to the buyer of 1%, the buyer can take your other 0.5% from the subsidy they're getting from the seller.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
And that'll be
Yes.
put on the Alta.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so I presume that on the Alta, then
Great question, though.
what you'll start seeing on the Alta then, we're used to seeing on the seller side, all the commission dollars. And if that's 2.5 and you're getting a credit to the buyer, you'll see the buyer paying a portion of that commission on the right side of the page. That's what you'll start seeing in a little bit of a change there.
Yeah.
But now we want to get into,
Wait,
if it's not yet, this
go to the indent.
Yeah, this indented paragraph. I want everyone to really pay attention here, okay? The indented paragraph is instructions to you as the buyer broker on what to insert into the contract. Okay? If broker receives any compensation from seller or seller's representative for services covered by agreement, that amount will be credited toward buyer's obligation to pay broker compensation. So, check mark. Buyer will request seller contribution to broker compensation in the amount of blank % or blank dollar amount in offers to purchase property. Buyer understands that the seller contribution is negotiable and will ultimately be determined by a ratified sales contract between buyer and seller. Again, what's happening in these two agreements is some of the stuff that we did on the contract during the going back and forth is now being predetermined in the agreement with the buyer agent agreement and predetermined with the seller agent agreement. And now we're being given instruction here on the buyer broker agreement. Oh, and Anthony, I want you to put this in the offers you're about to write. So they've agreed to it here to do that. Okay.
Lily's question was, what about selling bonuses? If the selling bonus plus the compensation offered by the seller is more than what your buyer broker compensation states here, you cannot get the difference. If you put 3% here and they're offering 2.5 with $1,000 bonus, then you probably haven't reached the 3% mark, depending upon the sales price of the house. You can actually get the bonus. Does that make sense?
This is so the discussion you've got to have here, folks, is, and I'll tell you, this part of the challenge here is, and this is why I've talked with a lot of agents over the years. It's what is your value you're bringing to the table? And if you don't feel you're valuable in the marketplace, you will start putting 1% here because you're afraid and you have potentially you have limited thinking on, I can't get the buyer to sign here if I put 3% because I can't show them how I'm worth it. And you will then be walking down a path of being a 1% agent or less, thinking that I'm just worth $3,000 because I don't think they have it. The discussion is, give me the opportunity to get this compensation as I'm working for you. Your job is to join me in making sure that we get you the house and that I get compensated for the hard work that I'm doing. Does that sound fair to you? Bobblehead close. If we're not able to do that, we will have a discussion afterwards to alter this if necessary. Okay? And then that's partly where you're getting trust. Do you have trust with the buyer? If you're just grabbing them from an open house and haven't built a relationship, they're going to have a hard time with that potentially. But this is why I put together those two books on here's all the forms for the buyer, here's all the forms for the seller. I am going to make sure that we get through this and you're protected. I am building my value on that. I'm building my value on how many offers we get through. So that's a whole nother discussion, but in this point right here, if you want the 3, if you want the 2.5, I mean, we've said before, take as less as you want. I'm now saying put in as much as you want. Because then it's negotiating to get that money on the table to get you paid. You say,
Yeah.
I need 3% closing cost assistance. Okay, I get 3%. Guess what? You just got a 3% commission. Or you covered the 2.5 that you had in this agreement. And now the buyer now has a 0.5% money in their pocket to put it to the closing. And now you're the winner and you're going to get referrals. Don't be going down the path of, I don't have value in the marketplace, so therefore I'm going to go for the low amount here.
I'm going to give you guys a suggestion and then I'm going to tell you a standard. Okay. So my suggestion is that you ask for 3% there because you can always give the buyer back the difference if it's 2.5 by amending the contract, right? So no harm, no foul to the buyer if you needed to. As an office, we're going to put in a standard. So there is going to be a set amount that needs to be entered in there. We haven't done it in the past. Most brokerages do it where they have what their standard is. And so our standard is going to probably end up being 2.5. So if you go lower than that, you have to have approval by your brokers and your team leaders as to why you're discounting your commission. It doesn't mean that we're not going to do it. It doesn't mean that if that's the only way your buyer can get the house to go down to a 1% to absolutely get it. Like we're not holding your buyer hostage by not allowing them to complete a deal that's really important for them. But we have to set a standard because some of the things Anthony and I are seeing come across where people are taking 1% or 0%, like you can't survive on that and we can't allow it as the brokerage, right? Because you're still going to be held liable through our E&O insurance if you do something wrong. And if you're not charging a commission, you have no coverage. You have no coverage. So if they sue you for the $50,000 for the foundation problem, we have no way to cover you. E&O does not cover you putting 0 in that amount. So we have to implement a standard. Anya, you had your hand up.
And then Steve McIlvain after Anya.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of joined later, so I maybe you guys talked about it, maybe I missed it. But number one, to your point, I think it's a good idea that we have a standard that our office charges or will allow us to go down to, because yes, we could potentially be competing, the same agents in the same office, we could be competing for the same deal or the same interviewing with the same client. And if we say, well, our brokerage charges this, and then another agent from our office is saying, well, yeah, I'll do it for 1.5%, like
right.
that, right? We just shoot ourselves in the foot saying that our brokerage charges is not me, right? Which up until this time we had that flexibility, but sometimes like, well, I talked to another Keller Williams office and they're willing to do it for 2. Just like, okay. Well, we're different. But my question actually was so in the second paragraph where it was edited, what is that referring to? Because up top above it says buyer broker compensation will be. So if we were charging 2.5, but you're saying, put 3% in there and you can always come down and amend it. What goes in the second paragraph? The buyer will request seller contribution. That's if they're not offering. Yes.
Yeah,
That's
so
between you and your
that's
buyer.
saying,
Yeah.
because remember, you signed the buyer broker agreement right up front, right? And
Yes.
so they don't know if a seller is offering anything. But here says that the buyer wants you to negotiate into any contract that you write for them that the commission amount is paid for by the seller.
Gotcha. Okay, so
Right.
here, if you're putting 3, you'll put 3 in here
Three
too?
here, right, yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And so when you're writing an offer, you already know, and your buyer agents know that, hey, we will be asking for that commission because I don't want
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
dish it out.
Right.
And it's also okay for you, if you put 3 in the buyer broker compensation, it's fine for you to put 2.5 in what you're going to negotiate in the contract, as long as the buyer understands the difference between the two would be on them to pay if that's what you chose for them to do, right? Or we
Okay,
can
got
amend
it.
the contract at some point.
How does this apply to VA?
VA recently released the note that said that the veterans can now pay a commission.
Okay, good, because I heard that yesterday too, but it wasn't, apparently it's not official yet.
Yeah, it might not be, but
Yeah,
they're
so-
moving forward to do that.
By the time all of this goes in, remember, August 17th is our date for the NAR settlement stuff to actually go into effect. We're going to get this in effect July 1st, so we're going to have a little bit of a delta of time in between those two dates. But I think if you had it now, they would not argue the buyer paying it because they're going to temporarily suspend it. So
I think it's
McElvain.
the temporary
Yeah.
thing has gone into effect for the VA
Yeah.
buyer.
Yeah.
Okay. Steve McElvain, you got your hand raised.
Thank you.
So first a comment, well, 2 comments. One, I actually really like that the seller and the buyer compensation is broken out in separate paragraphs. I think for us who are listing agents, mainly, I think it's actually going to help with getting compensated more fairly. And then the second thing is, we have to do a really good job of explaining the value of a buyer's agent. I know you said it, but it has to be said over and over again, and we have to get really good at it because we are fighting for each other right now, folks. We are fighting for each other. The one comment or the one question is, we put in the recent agreement the 3% for the buyer, and explain to them that we can make a correction if they don't offer that, the seller doesn't, the listing doesn't have that. It didn't go over great, and they had us reduce. So I think figuring out a way to script that better so we can have that good conversation.
Don't let them reduce, and I'll tell you why. Because at the bottom of the page, there's other provisions, right? And we will get an attorney to draw up what we can write there that talks about how we can do a reduction in the price in the commission compensation.
And this is about a month ago.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think we're seeing this is starting to take a little more shape, and we all knew that until we saw the forms and what our colleagues and the association attorneys drafted, we weren't sure. So we kind of saw some wild, wild west stuff out there. This is going to bring some clarity to it. Sean Allison,
that'll be really helpful when you have that language from your attorney for the other provisions.
For sure.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. And was that all from you? Okay. Sean Allison, you got your hand up?
Yeah, for the, if you can scroll back to the section, the broker, the commission section.
Yeah.
The part that part. So basically, would this be a case where, say you charge 3% for the compensation, and let's say the buyer can only afford to cover 2.5% of that, would you put 0.5% into the buyer will request seller contribution?
Say the question again.
So let's say you charge 3% for your services, but the buyer can only afford to pay you 2.5%. Would you put then 0.5% into that second slot where a buyer will request seller contribution?
So I would put the most amount that you, like, if they want to, for you to try to at least get the 2.5, I would put the 2.5 there.
Okay.
Because it says that it's negotiable and will ultimately be determined by a ratified sales contract.
Right.
Right, so I would put the maximum to cover whatever it is here. Like, cause you could put 3 there to match what you have in the buyer broker compensation and only negotiate 0.5% if that's what you need to negotiate.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
You can go down, you just can't go up. So if you put 2.5, you can't then negotiate 3.
Okay, that makes sense.
Ultimately, I guess you could, because it's going to be determined by the sales contract anyhow.
Yeah. And the comment I have on this, you know, we've always been talking about, dang, the discounters this and the discounters that. The discounters could be discounters because the listing agents were offering so much commission.
Right.
And now that it's negotiable, they can't put TBD or what's in the MLS anymore. They now have to say, what am I worth to the marketplace? And they have to get that agreement, regardless of what the seller's offering. That's what they're supposed to get. Okay. So this is a really, I see this as a leveling the playing field.
Yeah, I
really
agree.
do. Anya, you had your hand raised.
So I think Kristen's team had the hand raised first, so I'll let him go first and then I'll go after.
All right.
Thank you. So we had a question. Raekwon asked it earlier, and I'm not sure if it was answered. Agreements that are already in place right now that we've signed that maybe aren't listing until like later this summer or after July, do those need to be redone?
Re-signed?
Yeah.
I would, because everything changes here about what you've asked. There's nothing that addresses any seller subsidy or anything. So when those fields are in the MLS, now, if you don't want to, you probably can do an addendum, and I would suggest doing an addendum to it and adding in everything that's not there, so that you don't terminate something and not have them relist with you by not signing something. I very rarely tell you to not use the original document.
Okay.
And then put it in an addendum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, will those,
go ahead.
Will those, so I actually do have 2 listings that are signed currently, that one is coming towards the end of June. So it's going to be before the changes are made, right? Because this is July 1 change. Right. And then another one that's signed and it's coming soon, July 4th, and coming active July 11th. So I guess at that point, I would ask them to, do the additional, terms or whatever.
Yes.
All right. Now, second question, regarding if we went back, I don't know, who's operating. Anthony, are you operating the
I am,
forms?
yeah, because I wanted to come back in just a second, talk about this. This is the amendment that Sheila's talking about. This is going to be an easier way to do things than it is to cancel your paperwork and come in with new paperwork.
Right.
Just amend what you have.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
just use the verbiage. Okay, got
yes.
it. My question was, in the buyer broker compensation, in the second paragraph where you were asking for the closing costs from the seller, I guess help me understand it. So the change that is taking place, is it July 1 that no longer by July 1 we can put the seller compensation to the buyer broker? Is that simultaneously at the same time, or no? That's not until later.
You mean
the commission on the MLS? Yes.
They should coincide with the forms. Yes.
Okay. So now my question is, if we don't know what each individual seller is offering to us potentially, right? Because we're never going to see it, nor is our clients. So we ask them to sign this and say, you know, whatever, 2.5 or 3 or whatever you wanted to do. And then we find out and just, we need to learn how to explain this to our clients. If we find out that truly the seller is actually offering a compensation, but we'll find out that later based on each individual listing, then we're only asking for the difference, correct? So let's say if particular seller on 123 Main Street is offering 2%. Yeah, in the agreement, we signed 3%. We're only going to be asking for 1% commission to be covered. Do I understand it correctly?
100%.
Okay, thank you. So it's going to be very messy and, you know, everybody's going to,
Yeah.
I mean,
We're
what are we
going to
getting
get
paid?
through the mud together.
Right. And
Of course.
We're going to get and just for the Kingstown people, just so that you know, because we were anticipating that this is going to take a little while for everybody to get through. I am now listed as a broker on the Kingstown office as well, so that you have 2 of us to call, 2 of us to talk to, and that you have 2 resources besides just Anthony. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
So this is the timeline, folks. We're in June 18 period right here, okay? This is the deadline they have to execute appendixes and things like that were in the agreement. And then August 17, the action required is the MLS changes. So what we're seeing with these contracts are, hey, this is what we're doing to get ready for June 18.
Right.
Okay. And like, you know, like they said, that was when was supposed to happen was July. Now they've switched it. This document here may change again. So it is a transition period. You know, and we'll work through it as we get through that. So, but the big change on this one is, here's what I'm going to get compensated for, and you're giving me permission to offer to put this out there as broker compensation in the contract. I thought it was interesting. We keep talking about it's negotiable, and they threw in there, I'm going to pre-negotiate with me on this here. And I think they're just trying to cover every base. Someone may already be offering your commission. So if it's already being offered, I would submit you probably still put this in there in case they get an offer from someone else that says, my buyer's going to pay it all and I don't need it. Okay, so you'll
and that second part also helps you with when the buyer says, I don't have 3% to pay you.
Right.
I have my closing costs. That's about all I have. And you say, not to worry, because we're going to try to negotiate 3% here. Remember, when everything changes, everything changes. If you're a listing agent, your #1 job currently is to prove your value and then to make sure that the seller understands the value of a buyer's agent, so that when it comes in the offer, that sellers don't go, I'm not paying that. Right?
Right.
Value. This is a value conversation. All right, let's go to the contract itself. Is anybody having trouble hearing me? Okay, somebody text me that they're having a hard time.
Someone had a question here real quick. Can we get a copy of all the new forms? All the new forms are right here. The NVAR.
Can you drop the link in there and
Yeah,
then they can
I did it earlier. I'll do it again.
Yep, do it again. If you, awesome. All right, and then we'll
everybody
go to,
click this link now. Go ahead and click that link, and now you've got it up on your computer. And then when you click, this is the exclusive selling. This is the exclusive right to represent. And now this is the contract.
And do yourself a favor for right now, wait to look at those forms until after we're done with this Zoom.
Yeah, if you would.
Because if you're busy reading the form and you miss something important of how we're telling you to do this, it's going to cause yourself confusion later. All right, so here it is, guys. This is it, the big change to the contract. Seller subsidy to buyer, seller payment towards buyer brokerage commission. The important part is what it says underneath there. The obligation is enforceable by the buyer's brokerage against the seller and may be modified only by subsequent written agreement by the buyer's brokerage. So where before we were never a party to the contract, we're not technically a party to the contract where we have to sign this contract. But if the seller doesn't fulfill their obligation in the contract, we have the right as the brokerage to take them to task for it. Does that make sense?
Sheila, I had a question.
Sure.
Okay. Seller payment, brokerage compensation. If it's not effective yet on MLS, why is it showing on the contract? So we're still seeing compensations towards buyer's agent on you said effective August 17th, things will change. Why has it always why is it already changed on the contract?
Okay, so we have certain timelines in which we needed to do things. So the contracts had to come out first, and then the MLS will change. It's August 17th is when that actually has to be changed. I believe, and I think Scott sent us the link earlier about Bright, ours here will change simultaneously. We can change before August 17th. Our date to have everything changed is August 17th. Does that make sense?
I don't understand what the E saying.
You don't understand what?
So the E is saying buyers compass. I lost the page.
Anthony, can you go back?
Yeah.
All right. Seller's payment towards buyer's brokerage compensation.
Right.
Why do we have that in the contract if everything is going to change on MLS in August, I'm saying?
Because the compensation to the buyer broker is now negotiable in the contract between the buyer and the seller. So that the seller could get reimbursed for something that they're paying out of their pocket.
I think also I'll add on to this. If you're doing a contract, okay, let's say you did a contract on July 1, and this is when these go into effect. And July 1, they still have not taken out what the buyer agent compensation is in the MLS yet. What you would do then is take that compensation and pop it on right here. If you're asking for more, then you pop that on right here. Let's say that they're offering.
If the buyer is asking.
Yeah, let's say that the MLS it still has it in there, and in the MLS it says 2.25, but your buyer compensation agreement is that they want you to put 2.5 in there, then you would put 2.5% on this one. Okay. So it's transition, y'all. We're gonna be through this, and all the stuff's supposed to be changed by mid-August. So by September 1, July 1, the forms are out. By September 1, we'll know this is the way that we do business now.
And I think this is really good because this kind of forces a lot of buyer's agent to be contacting the listing agent to talk about what their seller conversation would be, so that you're not wasting time putting some numbers down and then having your offer rejected because seller's not offering this much, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Even if the seller's not offering what they're saying, like I said, they're doing 2.25. This is the chance to put it in there for the 2.5 or the 3 or whatever you're doing. And it's going to be different house to house, depending on, are there multiples? No, there aren't multiples. Great. Now you can kind of go for it. Anya,
and you guys have to really start learning how to explain to your clients what's happening, right? Because if your client is in your buyer broker agreement, it says 2.5, because that's what you choose to use, and you're negotiating in here 1%, you have to have the conversation with your client that the difference of the 1.5% is going to be on them for payment, right? So communication is going to be key. I think that's going to be the biggest problem that we end up having is when agents break down the communication.
Right. And folks, I just want to add on to that.
Uncomfortable conversation. It's
Yeah.
going to be an uncomfortable conversation, without a doubt. But you're going to have it.
And guys, we've been talking about this for well over a month. We've had a session here. Anytime I'm doing the contracts, since this has come down, I'm talking about that. Go deep into this. We've done it here on Broker Time. So when we're saying you've got to really master this, we've been giving you opportunities to sit here at our feet and talk this through. So next Friday, if we need to, we'll do this again to talk about what these are. I'll sit here and we'll walk this through. This is the way we're going to learn. You're going to get best at it when you actually sit down with your buyers.
And yes, we will do this for Maryland and DC as soon as we get those forms.
Yeah. Anya, Henry.
Yeah, so I'd like to clarify and ask a question. So if we know, let's say this is right, we're writing an offer and we know that the listing or the seller is offering 2.5%, right? This is where we're going to be putting the 2.5% in seller subsidy.
Yes.
Or this
No.
net
I'm
reduced
sorry.
by.
So it depends on what they said they were going to offer. If it's a seller subsidy, then you put it in seller subsidy. If they said they were going to offer broker compensation, then you put it in broker compensation. If they said they were going to offer both, then you put both.
Yeah.
So you differentiate, and
Yeah,
that
you bring up a
raises
really
the
good
second
point.
question.
Yeah, but you bring up a really good point, folks. We've never had to put this down when we wrote an offer on what I'm going to get paid. We never had to write this in the offer. So what you're seeing in the MLS now, imagine that all we changed was the form and the MLS stays the same. You would pull that number out like, oh, okay, he's offering 2.5, and you'd write it down right here, 2.5. Okay, because part of this is disclosing to the seller, this is what your net's going to reduce because of what you're paying out. Okay. But now why are we doing it? Because it's not going to be in the MLS. We have to have the discussion with the listing agent. And if the listing agent says we're offering 1, but my buyer agreement says 2.5, I got to put 2.5 here so they know that's part of the negotiation.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so my second question following this, if right, there was a rule that the buyer can only accept X amount in seller subsidies, not to exceed the full closing cost, whatever the closing cost was for each property. So are these rules changing? And if the buyer is asking for 2.5 or 3% in compensation, and then in addition, I know we're not in these times right now, but let's say there is a home inspection, there is items that the seller now is giving the buyer the money, are these amounts going to change what's allowed by the lender of what the buyer can accept from the seller and all these contribution and compensations?
Great question. Really good question. And it actually states somewhere that it actually is based on what the lender will allow. And so you might max out, right? If you're asking, if you get, let's just say argument's sake for a VA, 4%, like that's your line, right? And if with the closing costs, the seller subsidy, and the buyer broker commission, you end up at 5%, the buyer needs to pay the delta.
Or you negotiate.
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah.
I don't think my brain caught it.
Okay. So I'm using VA, right? And so VA says 4% is the maximum that the seller can contribute to you closing. And just so you guys are aware, just every closing cost does not get calculated in that 4%. So there are some things that the seller can pay that wouldn't calculate into the 4%, but that's a little sidebar. But up to 4%. If like a home inspection credit, buyer broker credit, and a seller subsidy credit all exceed that 4%, the buyer has to come up with the difference.
Or, and I would add on to this, or this is where you put in there. I think this is why they have it separated out. Seller subsidy is definitely going to affect what the buyer can get with the lender. Commission is not connected to that. Okay. Unless the seller is rolling the commission into the seller subsidy instead of the buyer broker compensation. That's why you might say, I want 4%, but look, all I want is 2.5% for the compensation. And I want, what did I say, 4.5%, and I want 2% for seller subsidy. You may need to
Subsidy,
divide it
right.
up there depending on what the lender is telling you is the maximum they can get.
Mhm.
I think this is why they have this divided up. is because they
Separated.
realize there's a lender issue here.
Right.
You know?
I think one of Anya's question was, are the lender considering raising the subsidy amount?
Yes, so there are a lot of different things that are happening with lenders right now. There are a lot of moving parts. There's real estate agents, there's lenders, there's buyers, there's sellers. Lenders are, I can tell you, our in-house lender is actually even figuring out, can they take buyer compensation and roll it into a loan, right? So there are a lot of things I think that will come out where you'll see some of these things change because they're going to be forced to change.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a problem because if
Right.
sellers are not offering compensation and not allowing this, buyer broker compensation, then even if you put it in there, it gets rejected. Our clients might be at disadvantage. So having them being able to roll in that into the closing cost, not the closing cost, the loan is actually probably a good idea for lenders to figure out and tell us whether or not they can do that, because it will come out that, in a multiple offer situations, it's going to be,
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And again,
Story, you had your hand raised.
the
Sorry, go
buyer
ahead.
broker compensation, paying what the buyer broker compensation, so the buyer broker compensation in the offer is paying hopefully what the buyer broker compensation is on the buyer agreement. It's technically a wash. So I would assume that the lender is going to come out with some sort of verbiage that says that that's more of a pass through as opposed to a closing cost to be put in. Right now, it doesn't say that, so it would technically be considered that. But I'm assuming they're going to change that. They would have to. Story.
Story.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. But basically what we're talking about, though, are conversations that we should have already been having with our buyers. If you're going to, if you're going to put 3% and you go in even with a FSBO, or you go into a house that your buyers want that's listed for 2.5%, your buyer should already be under the, not assumption, but they should understand that they were going to have to make up that 5% anyways.
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
Without a doubt. But before it was more because, part of the NAR settlement and part of what the plaintiff was saying in the whole lawsuit was that buyer agents never negotiated for their own commission. It was a predetermined amount that the seller decided to give to the buyer's agent, and it was put in the MLS, and that's what buyer agents took, right? You were always allowed to negotiate it. I had an agent always in Jacksonville, North Carolina, who, if you offered 2.5%, called and said, my fee is 3, I need you to ask the seller for an extra 5% from me. You knew if he was showing your property that you were going to get a call before he showed it asking for the difference. So it's always been negotiable, right? But because it was so just, I'm sure 99.999% of you took whatever was in the MLS, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were right to some degree that it was not negotiated. They're looking for you to negotiate for your commission now. That's what they want you to do. You should negotiate on both sides, on the listing side and on the buy side, technically.
Yeah.
Well, sadly, that's going to cause some of our clients deals, right? Because now we're going to negotiate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Horrible.
There's going to be fallout on this that the
we don't think this is a good thing.
Yeah, judge is not aware of, and whatever. All right, so
wait, Shane.
Okay.
Veronica has a question. She couldn't raise her hand. Veronica has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, that doesn't allow me. I don't know why. So just to be sure, because I won't understand a little
Yeah,
bit
go
better.
ahead.
Hope I'm not confused. So let's say I'm the listing agent and my client said, I don't want to give no seller substitute. I don't want to give no compensation, nothing, right? So, and let's say I receive an offer for the buyer agent, and in order to be a strong offer, you know, they put 0 and 0. Let's go up. Can you go up again? Sorry.
On the contract? Got it.
Yeah, yeah, there we go. So let's say I'm the buyer agent, and in order to make a strong offer, you know, seller substitute, we put 0, and buyer broker compensation, you know, the sell 0 as well.
Got it.
Okay, and on the buyer agreement, I put 2.5%. In this case, it means that the full 2.5%, the buyer will is entitled to pay me. Do you understand correct?
Exactly.
Okay, and in the sales contract, I will not put nothing. The seller and the listing agent will they will not be aware, right? And I will give a buy agreement to the title company in order for them to pay at the closing. It's right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Now, again, we are not trying to hold your buyer's hands and tell them they can never buy a house. Don't misunderstand what we're saying, right? If it comes down to the buyer saying, I can only pay you 2%, even though I wrote 2.5 in there, I can only pay you 2% based on what we had to escalate to. Let's work it out. Let's figure it out. We want your buyer to have a house. So let's work it out.
We can always do an addendum later, right? We can always do, you know, after.
Exactly.
Right.
Always by doing the right thing by the client. And at the same time, you can't work for free.
Right. Sounds good. Perfect.
Right.
Yeah, I got a quick question.
Go ahead, Kevin.
So this lawsuit was about agents using commissions to drive prices up. You know, if we have a 3% buyer agency commission and we put it now on the contract, doesn't this drive the price of real estate up? You know what I mean? Because yeah, I'm going to be asking for 3% for all of my buyers. You know what I mean? And then when we submit the offer, you know, at 3% and we have the better offer, I mean, it is going to drive the price up, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about what the seller nets.
Well, that would be if you're taking the 3% and adding it on to the sales price of the house, right? Because if you're asking for 3 now, and let's just say I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. So say $500,000, you're asking for 3%, right? So you've got what, 15,000. So the seller is going to net 485. It'll be less than that because they're paying their own broker. But for argument's sake, so it's not going to drive the price of the house up unless you increase the sales price.
To do that, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But you know, if we've got a like in a multiple offer situation, I just think that they need to get these laws put in place with the lender. For example, if we settle on a 2.5% commission and we've got a buyer agency agreement that says 3%, then something needs to be worked out with the lender where the other 0.5% is included in the loan. That's
you could do that. And Kevin, you have the right to stand on what it is that you're willing to work for.
Right.
Remember that if that buyer can't pay you, and the reason you're having these conversations up front before you can show a house is when this buyer broker agreement has to be signed before you show a house, because there's no confusion on what the buyer is responsible before you actually show the house. Right. So at that point, you say, if the house is listed and the seller is willing and we can negotiate in the contract 2%, you owe me 1%. Are we clear on that, Mr. Buyer?
Yeah.
Gila, well, the problem is, but maybe this is a concern for a lot of us on buyer side. We have those agreements, and we did state that 2.5 is my commission, and if seller doesn't pay, you know, you pay. But the way we explained was, we have those agreements all signed, but the way we explained was, the way it is that my clients think, well, if MLS says 2.5%, then I don't have to pay the 2.5%. But now we have to go back to those buyers that were looking for homes and say, hey, you know, things are changing. Yes, I did tell you the 2.5% commission might come from your pocket, but now it's not even going to be on MLS. So we have to actually, you know what I mean, negotiate it. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, but what's
Right.
going to happen is and this is the piece that we're not sure where it is yet. Okay, as far as the agreement says that the listing companies will put it on their websites, and
Right.
you also
Mhm.
need to call them. You'll text them. You'll email them. I want something in writing. Honestly, I don't want a phone call. And that's where this is going to go. I think the discussion begins at the listing table, where you talk about where does the money come from, and did you pay your buyer agent directly when you bought this, or did it come from the transaction? Most sellers are going to understand that and say, yeah, I didn't pay them directly. I said, because the basket of money comes from the down payment and the lender, and then it's cashed out by the equity of the seller's equity. It is a combination of those two elements that's bringing about the cash to pay everyone. The first one being the bank that the seller has a loan with. They're probably getting the biggest portion of that basket of money than anybody else. And then you got your taxes, you got your closing costs, you got your lender fees, and yes, you have your agents as well. But it all comes from that basket of money, the down payment and the loan from the seller, and it's cashed out with the equity that comes from the buyer, and then the equity that is using it to flow on the table from the
Right.
seller. That's the discussion we have. And then if you have an unreasonable seller that says, I only want to pay you 1% and nothing to anyone else, you got a business decision to make as a
Yes.
realtor.
Yeah.
And I think
So
that
real quick,
yeah,
Anthony, real quick,
before anyone else,
Anthony.
Raymond's had his hand up.
Yeah, but before you go to Raymond, I have a few people coming on for blueprint review, Nora and a few others. Please hang tight. We're wrapping up a meeting. We'll get to the blueprint review in a minute.
Broker review.
Blueprint review.
Okay.
No.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Go ahead, Raymond.
Raymond, you got a question?
Yes, I actually have two things to mention. First, the media is not explaining that to the public the way we understand it. They just going out and saying, in a way, clients are coming and saying, buyers, broker, I'm not getting any money anymore. And they, people look to pay less and less, as you know. The second thing is like in a competitive market, like where you see multiple contracts, if your client, since the buyer agent compensation becoming negotiable, so and it's all about how much the seller is netting, and you have multiple contracts. The seller just may not want to take any contract where he can lose paying something to the other part, to the buyer's agent. Then at this point, I feel that at the end, your client is going to be fed up losing contracts with you, and he's going to go straight to the listing agent and try to negotiate with him how he can get this house and what he is willing to pay to the listing agent to just pick and choose whatever he wants.
That's a possibility, and we'll just have to hang tight and see if that firms up to be a more common way of doing it. And we talked about that earlier. This was recorded. We'll be putting it on the Facebook media sites. So we do need to kind of wrap this up, folks, because there's another group that's coming onto this channel to talk about that. But thank you for everyone who came on board. Again, if you go to NVAR.com and you type in forms to search, you will see that they have a lot of Zoom meetings coming up. And so you might want to see virtual here. They have some Zoom webinars coming up at NVAR if you want to do that. We're not done. We will be talking about this as we move forward to prepare everyone for the changes. Okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
Anthony.
All right, folks.
If you're here for Blueprint Review, please hang